Zuri had been away from home for years, working quietly in Nairobi, saving every shilling she could, and living a simple life. When Christmas came, she packed her small bag and made the trip back to her family's house. She was excited to see familiar faces again, to share laughter and stories, but deep inside, she knew how her relatives always treated her. Her family was wealthy, proud of their big house and fancy cars. To them, success was measured by what you wore, the job title you carried, and how much money you could show. Zuri didn't fit that picture. She dressed modestly, spoke softly, and never boasted about anything she had. Her cousin Ngozi, the loudest and proudest of them all, had always found a way to remind her that she was not successful enough. That night, the house was glowing with Christmas lights. Music played inside, and the smell of roasted meat filled the air. Everyone was dressed in shiny clothes, clinking glasses, and laughing loudly at the dining table. Zuri walked in with a smile, hoping at least this year things would be different. But Ngozi's sharp eyes caught her. With a smirk, she whispered something to the others, and soon the message was clear. There was no seat for Zuri inside. Instead, they told her to sit outside on the porch, away from the warmth and the laughter. She sat there quietly, the cold night air wrapping around her, while her family celebrated without her. Zuri's story of being pushed aside didn't start that Christmas night. It had been happening since she was a child. Growing up, she was always the cousin who didn't quite fit in. While her relatives wore expensive clothes from the city and boasted about their parents' wealth, Zuri wore simple hand-me-down dresses. She didn't mind much, but the way they laughed at her left scars. At every family holiday, her cousins found something new to mock. If it wasn't her old shoes, it was her hair, or the way she spoke about her dreams. Zuri used to say she wanted to do something different with her life, to build something of her own. She imagined starting a business one day, something that would help people and give her independence. But whenever she mentioned it, her cousins would laugh out loud. "Look at you," Ngozi would say. "You can't even afford new clothes, and you're talking about business?" The others would join in, making her feel small, as if dreaming was only for the rich. While her cousins lived in comfort, Zuri worked. She took on odd jobs, helping neighbors with laundry, selling fruit in the market, even cleaning small offices in town. The work was hard, but she never complained. She believed every small effort was a step forward. Sometimes, when she was exhausted, she would remember her father's words. He wasn't a rich man, but he was wise. He always told her, "Respect doesn't come from birth, but from what you build." Those words became her anchor. Her father had noticed the way the relatives treated her. He would pull her aside and remind her not to let their mockery define her. "Let them laugh now," he'd say. "One day they will see." But as a young girl, it was difficult to believe that. The sting of rejection was real, and the porch, the corner, or the far end of the table always seemed to be her place at family gathering. Even as a teenager, the pattern continued. During Christmas and weddings, her cousins would flaunt new clothes and gadgets. They posed for pictures together while leaving her out of the frame. They said it was a joke, but Zuri knew it wasn't. It was a reminder that, in their eyes, she was not good enough. Still, she kept her head down and focused on her small jobs. Every coin she saved gave her a sense of pride they could never take away. Zuri learned to live with the whispers and laughter, but she also learned patience. She understood that life had a way of turning tables, and her father's words echoed in her heart. Deep down, she believed her time would come, not to prove them wrong, but to prove herself right. And even though no one else saw it yet, Zuri was quietly building the foundation of the woman she was destined to become. The night was supposed to be about family, love, and Christmas cheer, but for Zuri, it turned into another memory she would never forget. She sat quietly on the porch, the wooden chair beneath her creaking every time she shifted. From inside, she could hear the bursts of laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the sound of music filling the air. The smell of roasted goat and spiced pillau made her stomach twist, not because she was hungry, though she was, but because she knew she wasn't welcome at the table where that food was being served. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself as the cool December breeze brushed against her skin. Children ran past her, playing with sparklers, not even noticing her. She smiled at them softly, but when she looked back toward the glowing windows of the dining room, her heart sank. Every chair inside was taken by her relatives, dressed in bright clothes, their faces lit with joy. There was no space for her, not even at the far end. Then came the moment that stung the most. Her cousin Ngozi, dressed in a glittering red dress and loud enough for everyone to hear, leaned back in her chair and said, "Seats inside are for people who achieved something, not for dreamers like you." The words cut through the music and chatter, and just like that, the laughter inside grew louder. A few relatives even nodded, sipping their drinks as if the insult was entertainment. Zuri felt the sting of humiliation rise in her chest, but she refused to let it show. She straightened her back and fixed her gaze on the night sky. Her lips curved into a small, almost invisible smile. It wasn't a smile of joy, but one of quiet strength. If they only knew what she carried in her heart, what she had built in silence, their laughter would freeze. But she didn't say a word. Her silence confused them. Some expected her to break down, to argue, or to storm off. But Zuri simply sat there, calm and collected. Inside, she replayed her father's voice, reminding her, "Respect doesn't come from birth, but from what you build." She had built something, though none of them knew it yet. That thought warmed her more than the food or the fire ever could. As the night dragged on, the cold seemed sharper, the laughter seemed crueler, yet Zuri's quiet smile never faded. It was the kind of smile that hid a story no one had asked to hear. And while they mocked her for being a dreamer, Zuri knew she was far more than that. She was a doer. She was already living a life they couldn't imagine. That night, as her relatives feasted inside, Zuri sat outside in the cold, but she also sat on the edge of a moment that would change everything. What nobody at that table knew was that Zuri was not the struggling, insignificant cousin they thought she was. While they had spent years mocking her, she had been quietly building something powerful. In Mombasa, far away from their gossip and judgment, Zuri had started a logistics company with just a small savings account and a borrowed desk in a friend's office. At first, it was difficult. She worked long hours, chasing clients who barely trusted her. Many times she felt like giving up, but she remembered her father's words and kept pushing. Slowly, her hard work began to pay off. One client led to another, and soon her company became known for being reliable and efficient. Zuri hired drivers, bought trucks, and built a reputation that couldn't be ignored. Just a few weeks before Christmas, she had signed her biggest contract yet, a multi-million-shilling deal to manage government supply chain. It was the kind of success that would make headlines, the kind of success her cousins always bragged about but had never truly achieved. And yet, Zuri never told her family. She had arrived at the Christmas gathering with the same simple clothes and her usual quiet smile. She wanted to see something. Would they treat her differently if they thought she had nothing to show? Would they offer her warmth just because she was family, not because of what she had? The answer came quickly, and it broke a small piece of her heart. Nothing had changed. Inside that glowing dining room, her relatives measured worth by shiny clothes and loud titles. To them, Zuri was still the girl who never made it. They didn't ask how she was doing, didn't care about her journey, and didn't offer her a seat at the table. They still saw her as the outsider, the dreamer who never belonged. What they didn't realize was that the quiet woman they had pushed outside had more power, influence, and success than anyone in that room. Zuri could have easily bought the house they were sitting in, or the luxury cars parked outside. She could have thrown a party 10 times bigger than theirs without blinking. But she kept all of that to herself. Sitting on the porch that night, Zuri thought about it all. She thought about the long nights in Mombasa when she worked while others slept, about the tears she shed when deals fell apart, about the joy of finally building something from nothing. And here she was, treated no differently than before, as if none of it mattered. But Zuri didn't feel angry. Instead, she felt clarity. Their behavior only proved that their love had always been conditional. They never cared for her heart, only for her image. She leaned back, letting the cold air touch her face, and smiled to herself. The truth was simple. They didn't know it yet, but the girl they had cast aside had already become the most successful one among them. The laughter inside was at its loudest when everything suddenly changed. The sound of an engine, smooth and powerful, cut through the night air. It wasn't just any car. It was the kind that made people stop what they were doing. The kind you only saw in the driveways of the wealthy or gliding down the streets of Nairobi's richest neighborhood. The music and chatter inside slowly quieted as the headlights swept across the compound and the sleek car rolled to a stop right in front of the house. The door opened and a chauffeur stepped out. He wasn't just any driver. His crisp black uniform looked freshly pressed. His polished shoes gleamed under the porch light, and he carried himself with confidence. The way he walked, the way he adjusted his gloves, even the way he closed the car door, it demanded respect. For a moment, the relatives inside forgot their food, their laughter, and even their gossip. Everyone's eyes turned toward the window to see who this important guest was here for. Then came the words that froze the room. The chauffeur cleared his throat and spoke in a loud, formal voice. "Where is Madame Zuri?" "The car is ready." The name hit the air like a stone dropped in water. The ripples spread instantly. Forks paused in midair. Glasses hovered halfway to mouth. Conversations died mid-sentence. All at once, every head turned, not toward Ngozi, not toward the other cousins dressed in their fancy clothes, but toward the quiet figure sitting outside on the porch. Zuri looked up calmly, her simple dress glowing softly in the porch light. For a split second, no one moved. The silence was so sharp that even the children playing outside stopped to stare. Ngozi's jaw dropped. A few of the aunts exchanged confused glances, while one uncle leaned closer to the window as if his eyes were playing tricks on him. The chauffeur walked straight toward Zuri, bowing slightly when he reached her. His voice carried with respect, clear enough for everyone inside to hear again. "Madam, the car is ready whenever you are." And just like that, the porch that had been her place of shame became the center of attention. Every relative who had mocked her, who had laughed at her for sitting outside, now watched in stunned silence. The same woman they had pushed away was the one being treated like royalty. Zuri didn't rush to get up. She didn't boast or throw their words back at them. She simply rose with grace, smoothing her dress as if nothing had happened. But her quiet movements spoke louder than any speech could. That single moment shifted everything, the balance of power in the family, the way they looked at her, even the way they would remember this Christmas night. The girl they had pushed out had just become the woman everyone was forced to look at. The moment the chauffeur called her name, the dining room turned into chaos. Chairs scraped against the floor as relatives rushed toward the windows, tripping over each other to get a better view. Their eyes widened as they saw the sleek black car parked at the gate, shining under the Christmas lights. And then they saw her, Zuri, the same cousin they had pushed outside, standing calmly while the chauffeur bowed slightly. It didn't make sense to them. Just minutes ago, she had been the girl in the simple dress, the one they had laughed at. Now she was being treated like someone important, someone powerful. "No, this can't be right," one aunt whispered, her fork still clutched in her hand. Another cousin pressed her face to the glass, squinting as if looking harder would somehow change what she was seeing. Ngozi, who had been the loudest voice against Zuri all evening, stood frozen. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Finally, she forced out a shaky laugh and said, "It must be a mistake. Maybe the driver came to the wrong house." Her voice, usually full of confidence, cracked as she spoke. She marched toward the porch, trying to regain her usual boldness. "Excuse me," Ngozi said, pointing at the chauffeur. "Are you sure you have the right person? This is Zuri." "She doesn't." Before she could finish, the chauffeur turned to her, his expression firm but polite. "Madam, there is no mistake. I was sent here for Madam Zuri." He then stepped aside and bowed again, his entire body language showing respect that no one in the family had ever given Zuri. The silence that followed was heavy. The laughter, the gossip, the mocking, all of it disappeared in an instant. Inside, the relatives exchanged stunned looks, their pride deflating like balloons losing air. They couldn't believe it. The girl they had left shivering outside in the cold was now being escorted to a luxury car, like someone who mattered more than all of them combined. Ngozi's face burned red. She tried to laugh it off again, but her voice was weak. "But how? Zuri?" Her words stumbled out like she was choking on them. Nobody answered her. Nobody could. They all knew what they were witnessing was real, and it was something they could never take back. Zuri, on the other hand, stood with quiet dignity. She didn't gloat or mock them the way they had mocked her. She simply looked at the chauffeur, nodded gently, and began walking toward the car. Her calm steps felt louder than the music still playing in the background. Each one was a reminder to her relatives that they had underestimated her, and now the truth was standing in front of them, undeniable and unforgettable. That night, for the first time, the family who once mocked her could only stare at her in silence, because Zuri was no longer the outcast. She was the one being honored. Zuri didn't rush toward the car. Instead, she turned and walked back into the house. Her steps were steady, her face calm, as if she had been preparing for this moment all her life. The room, once filled with laughter and chatter, fell silent the second she appeared at the doorway. Every eye followed her as she made her way to the main table, the table they had refused her just a short while ago. Without asking permission, without hesitation, Zuri pulled out a chair and sat down. The same chair Ngozi had boasted about keeping for those who achieved something. No one dared to stop her. The same cousins who had mocked her minutes earlier now stared at their plates, their confidence gone. Ngozi fidgeted in her seat, her glittering red dress suddenly feeling like a costume in front of Zuri's quiet grace. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. The chauffeur stepped forward, his voice firm and respectful, making sure every person in the room could hear. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "allow me to properly introduce Madame Zuri. She is the CEO of the logistics company that recently signed the government's multi-million shilling supply contract." Gasps filled the room. Forks slipped from hands. A glass tipped over, spilling wine across the white tablecloth. The same relatives who had laughed at her for being just a dreamer now sat frozen, their faces pale. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The music in the background suddenly felt too loud for the silence at the table. Zuri sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't smile triumphantly, didn't gloat, didn't throw their insults back at them. She simply sat with the dignity of someone who no longer needed their approval. Her presence alone was louder than any words she could have spoken. Ngozi's lips trembled as she tried to recover. But why didn't you say anything?" she asked, her voice thinner than usual. She sounded less like the proud cousin, and more like a child caught misbehaving. Zuri didn't answer. She didn't need to. The chauffeur's announcement had already said everything. The truth was sitting in front of them, and there was no way to hide from it. For the first time, her relatives saw her not as the poor cousin in simple clothes, not as the dreamer they could mock, but as the most powerful person in the room. The laughter that had once surrounded her was gone, replaced by a silence so heavy it almost echoed. Even the children sensed something had shifted, watching from the corners with wide eyes. That night, the tables truly turned. Zuri, once cast out to the porch, now sat in the very seat of honor, and her family, who had prided themselves on their wealth and status, could do nothing but sit in shame as the truth sank deeper into their hearts. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the faint clatter of a spoon nervously hitting the side of a glass. Faces that had been bright with pride just an hour ago now looked heavy with shame. A few aunts exchanged nervous glances, while uncles cleared their throats as if searching for the right words. Finally, one cousin leaned forward and forced a shaky smile. "Zuri, we were just joking. We didn't mean it." The words opened the floodgates. Another relative quickly added, "Yes, don't take it to heart. It was only harmless fun." Someone else murmured, "We've always loved you, Zuri. Don't misunderstand us." Their voices overlapped, desperate to cover the insult with hurried excuses. Even Ngozi, who had been the loudest in mocking her, now looked down at her plate, her arrogance melted away. She muttered, "We were wrong, cousin. Please forgive us." Zuri listened in silence, her eyes moving slowly from one face to another. She wasn't angry, she was simply calm, almost too calm, and that unsettled them even more. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, clear, and stronger than they had ever heard it before. "The seat you gave me outside," she said softly, "showed me my place in your hearts." Her words hung in the air, heavy and sharp, cutting through every excuse. "Now I know where I truly belong, and it isn't here." The room went still. No one dared to interrupt. Some dropped their eyes to the tablecloth, ashamed to meet her gaze. Others looked at her as if seeing her for the very first time. The weight of her words sank deep, reminding them that apologies couldn't erase years of rejection and humiliation. Zuri stood slowly, pushing back her chair with a quiet firmness. The scrape of wood against tile echoed like a drumbeat. She didn't rush. She didn't stumble. She rose with the dignity of someone who had found her strength, someone who no longer needed validation from people who never valued her. "Zuri, wait, please," one aunt whispered, her hand half reaching toward her. Another uncle started to rise as if to stop her, but no one had the courage to move closer. They all knew the truth. They had lost her, and nothing they said now could bring her back. Zuri gave them one last look, not bitter, not vengeful, just final. She had carried the weight of their rejection for years, but tonight she was walking out of it forever. Without another word, she turned toward the door. In that silence, her family finally realized what they had done. They had spent years laughing at her, pushing her aside, treating her as less. And now, at the moment when they wanted her the most, she was the one walking away. Zuri walked out of the dining room with her head held high. The air outside was cool, but it no longer felt heavy against her skin. The chauffeur was already waiting by the car. The door opened wide with a respectful bow. His polished shoes gleamed in the porch light, and his calm posture made the moment feel even more powerful. For once, Zuri was not stepping into shame. She was stepping into dignity. Behind her, the sound of hurried footsteps broke the silence. Chairs toppled over, and cousins scrambled after her. "Zuri, wait," one called. Another cried, "Please don't leave like this. We didn't mean it." Their voices, once filled with arrogance, were now laced with panic. The same people who had mocked her moments ago were chasing her like children who had lost something precious. Ngozi stumbled out last, her glittering dress swaying as she pushed past others. "Cousin, please," she shouted, her voice cracking. "Don't leave angry. We can fix this. Come back inside." But Zuri didn't even slow her pace. She walked straight to the waiting car, her steps graceful, her silence louder than any answer she could have given. The neighbors had already noticed the scene. From across the street and behind half-opened gates, whispers carried in the night. "Isn't that Zuri?" one woman murmured. "The same girl they made sit outside?" Another man shook his head. "Look how quickly things change. They humiliated her. And now look, karma didn't waste time tonight." The words spread fast. Some neighbors smiled knowingly. Others shook their heads at the family's hypocrisy. It was no secret how Zuri had always been treated. Everyone had seen it over the years. The mocking, the rejection, the way she was pushed aside at every gathering. But tonight was different. Tonight, the world saw her rise, and the family's shame was no longer private. The relatives, desperate to save face, pleaded louder. "Zuri, don't listen to them," one aunt said, her voice trembling. "We love you. You've always been special to us." But their words fell flat. They weren't speaking out of love, they were speaking out of fear. They had lost their power over her, and they knew it. Zuri reached the car, the chauffeur still holding the door open patiently. She paused for just a moment, turning her face slightly as if to take one last look at the house she had once called home. The porch where she had sat in the cold was still lit, a painful reminder of how far she had come. Then she lifted her chin, stepped into the car, and allowed the chauffeur to close the door behind her. As the engine purred to life, her relatives stood helpless in the driveway, their begging voices fading into the night. The neighbors kept whispering, shaking their heads at the irony. Zuri hadn't just walked away. She had walked away in strength, leaving her family with nothing but regret and the echoes of their own cruelty. The car pulled away slowly, its headlights cutting through the dark Nairobi night. Zuri leaned back against the leather seat, her heart calm. As the city lights flickered past the window, a thought rose in her mind, clear and sharp. I used to beg for a seat at their table. Now I own my own. For years she had wished for their approval, craved even a little space in their world. But tonight had shown her the truth. She had built something greater on her own term. As they drove closer to the city, tall billboards lit up the skyline. On them was the bold logo of her logistics company, glowing proudly against the night sky. Trucks with the same logo rumbled down highways, carrying goods across the country. Every sign was proof of her work, her persistence, and her success. It was no longer a dream. It was real, and it was hers. Back at the family house, the music played faintly but no one danced anymore. Plates of food sat untouched. Relatives stared at one another, their earlier laughter gone. The image of Zuri stepping into that car replayed in their minds again and again. They realized they hadn't just lost her presence at the table, they had lost her respect. And respect, once gone, never comes back the same. For the first time, they understood what they had done. Their pride, their cruelty, their mockery had pushed away the very person who had become everything they claimed to value. That Christmas, the porch they had used to humiliate her became the memory that haunted them. And that Christmas, the girl outside became the woman everyone looked up to.